Hello, I'm Valerie Biden Owens, chair of the Biden Institute at the University of Delaware. Today, I have the privilege of introducing David Holt, Mayor of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, since 2018. Thank you, Mayor, for joining us on this episode of All Politics is Personal, a program where we introduce the public to the person behind the politician. We know anyone can research your policies and accomplishments, but that's not what we're here today to talk about. We're here to talk about you. Tell us, if you will, about growing up Holt.
So I'm born and raised in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City at that time, I think it's a lot different now, but was significantly smaller and a little more off the national radar. But it was a great place to grow up, just kind of I would say a very suburban lifestyle in Oklahoma City. I am a member of the Osage Nation, which makes me the first Native American mayor of Oklahoma City, but I wasn't really raised culturally that way. My tribal headquarters is 2 or 3 hours away from Oklahoma City. But my maternal grandfather was truly attended Indian schools and grew up more in that world around the city of Pawhuska, Oklahoma, which is in northeast Oklahoma, which is the headquarters now of the Osage Nation. So it's definitely in the lineage of my family. But again, I grew up in a more typical, suburban environment in Oklahoma City. I was always, running for stuff. I was sixth grade student council president and sophomore class president and all of those things. I was most likely to become the president in my senior class. So I suppose it was somewhat preordained that I would engage in a life of public service. And in fact, I went off to college after graduating from Putnam City North High School in Northwest Oklahoma City. I went off to George Washington in D.C. and ultimately got a degree in political science. And I was interning. I was wanting to take advantage of all the things that are worth taking advantage of by going to school in D.C. And I interned for a few Oklahoma members of Congress, names that would only be remembered perhaps in Oklahoma. Ernest Istook was a congressman from Oklahoma City at the time. J.C. Watts, people may remember him a little bit more. And that kind of put me in a position to get my first real job, in my first really paid job. And that was in the speaker's office. The speaker at the time was Speaker Hastert of Illinois. Oh. And I'm well aware of later things that transpired in his life, but I was just a junior guy, 21 years old, and had an opportunity to sit outside the speaker's door in the U.S. Capitol and bear witness to all the things that would.
That's a big deal.
That would normally include, and then 9/11 happened while I was there. So I started that job in early 2001, and so. I guess your question was more about upbringing.
Yeah,
so
you ran the
I'm
gauntlet.
All the way through the
I want to go back to sixth grade when you ran for president.
Yeah.
Why?
So I think the thing that drives people like me is this desire. Hopefully it's the positive desire to help people. And this is one way to do it. There are other ways. Other people become doctors. Other people become priests. But obviously being a part of the group of people that are making decisions for the community in which you live, whatever that community is, if it's sixth grade student council or it's the city of Oklahoma City, I'm the kind of person who's drawn to being a part of that, and it brings me fulfillment.
Besides wanting to be motivated and involved for a positive, was there a reason that it was anything that you worried about that you thought you could fix?
Great question. There are people who get drawn into things like this who have a story like there was this one tax I was really mad about, or this one regulation, or this one neighborhood
or
that
the playground
I felt
equipment was broken. Yeah.
I don't have that moment. For me, it was always much broader than that. I felt like I cared about all the things, and I wanted to be, somebody who was a part of the outcome for all the challenges and opportunities that would face us, and so that's always what I've been about. And I think that there's also an appealing part of public service in that it's very diverse work. I mean, it's like different every day. You're not building widgets in a factory. I mean, it's certainly, again, it's always intellectually stimulating. And I
Well,
think
certainly
that's
as mayor, because you have, my brothers often said the hardest job in the world is being a mayor because everybody knows where you live. And they all have a problem from clearing the roads to getting their checks. And
Yeah.
you have, besides the big picture that
Yeah.
goes on. In your household, and did your parents have refrains that they kept running and going over and over that you would wake up in the middle of the night hearing them in your ear? Like my parents told it. My father, your word is your bond.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, it's how quickly you get back up.
Yeah.
My mother, I don't care what everybody else is doing, Valerie, you're not doing it. Did you have those kind of things in your childhood that you remember your parents?
Interesting. It sounds like your family had enough witticisms for both of us. I don't think that I had that. I think I had great parents.
Or maybe we challenged them more. That they had
maybe I just didn't
I have
need
three
so much
brothers.
direction. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and definitely my brothers need direction, Maybe that's the reason.
But they were great parents, very loving and supportive. And as I said, I was basically an only child. So, everything revolved around me, which you have to be conscious of as an only child when you grow up, that's not really how the world
seems
works.
clear as you came here today, everything revolved around you. I mean, I'm supposed to be paying attention. And that's what happens. So when you grew up, and we're all still growing up, but when you were a kid and you grew up, did you decide sitting outside the office in Congress that you wanted to get into Congress, or that you wanted to run for mayor, or you just wanted to be involved in the political system in any way?
Great question. I think people do sometimes decide there's a certain level that they want to serve at, or a certain job they want to have. I think at that stage, when we'd kind of reached my life where I was in the halls of Congress in 2001, I think at that stage, I did think that I'd like to, serve in elected office someday. I had no plan for what that would be or what level it would be. I'm sure at that time, I've gotten over that, but I would think at that time Congress would have sounded appealing, or the House. I spent, some time there. But no, I didn't know what. I knew I would have to go home. I knew that, you rarely, there's not many paths to elected office that include living in Washington, D.C. So I knew that at some point I would have to do that. I didn't really have any ties back to Oklahoma City, other than that's where I was from. We didn't mention this, but it's a fairly critical aspect of my early upbringing. My mother passed away when I was 14.
Oh.
So my parents were divorced.
So what grade does that put you in at 14?
I was in the ninth grade.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So my parents were divorced, so it was just her and me. Her father had moved in with us as well, and she died of a relatively obscure blood disorder that was it was very sudden. It was within 48 hours.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. And so my father at that time, just had custody of me, every other weekend, and so he and my grandfather, his one-time father-in-law, definitely got along though, and worked together to finish the raising of me, which was still the rest of my high school years. Clearly my mom.
Where did you stay?
In the house that we were living in. At some point, my grandfather actually moved to California. He remarried, and so my dad would come down from. He was living a couple hours away at a family ranch that he had retired to from teaching. And so he would come and make sure I made it to school and everything.
So were you on your own then some of that time?
Sometimes during the weekends, and a little bit.
Maybe you could have used some of my parents' adages then.
Perhaps,
they could, but
there's no question. It's a very traumatic time in my life. You were, me and my mom were like. We were the only two people in the world. Yeah, for years, and because my parents had divorced when I was like 5. So, but I don't know. I think that if you study the lives of people who seem particularly driven, and arguably I am, I do think you often find a great loss in childhood. Oftentimes the loss of a parent, and I don't know what it is. I think it just motivates you to to make sure your life is worth it. It was life. I mean, not that she gave her life for me, but there is a sense that she did, and you want to make sure that that was all worth it and that you live for two people in a sense. So, I mean, once I got over the grief of it all, obviously, and the depression of it, I mean, I think it just sort of made me even more determined to do something great, and to.
Well, you went on in your sophomore year to become class president. If your mom died in your ninth grade.
I suppose you're right. You're
Yeah.
right. I ran just a few months later for.
Yeah,
for
I'm
class
listening to you.
president.
Yeah, I'm paying attention.
You're putting some things together. Yeah, this really should be a couch.
Yeah.
It really should be kind of.
But it is just it amazes me. So I would bet you are married, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so with your background, as you've explained it to me, I bet you're a pretty darn good husband.
Well, that is definitely not for me to say.
I'll call her
follow
later
up on
and
that.
talk.
Yeah.
What's your wife's name?
Part of this. Rachel. So we met at GW. She's from Philadelphia, so you got obviously kind of your neck of the woods, and we got married at our wedding reception was at the Union League in downtown Philly.
Oh yeah, I know it well.
We got the iconic picture in the middle of Broad Street with City Hall behind us, like many married couples from Philly would. So we got married in 2003. So I had been in the Capitol, and then I got offered an opportunity to work in White House legislative affairs. So I worked in the East Wing of the White House, which is pretty cool and surreal for a 23-year-old.
For any age, if you don't, when you walk into the White House, if you still don't get good pimples, then you shouldn't be walking in there.
Totally. I accept every invitation that your brother issues for that reason. I mean, he never get tired of it. Although I will say, it's funny how if you work there, so I worked in the East Wing for 2 years, I mean, there is a point where you hear the helicopter coming and you don't get up and go look out the window because you're like, well, I've seen the president arrive 1,000 times. I don't have to watch, but it's still very cool to walk into the White House every day to go to work, and I got to have that opportunity for 2 years. Rachel,
so then you got married.
Rachel and I, we married during that time.
Okay.
And then we moved to Oklahoma City. So she's from Philly.
How'd that go over?
She's an Italian from Philly. Nobody has lived outside of the Philadelphia metropolitan area.
So Oklahoma City must have been really appealing.
Pretty far, yeah. So she's right there. She's a saint, and she and I returned for me to Oklahoma City in 2004. She went to OU Law. And I went to work in a series of political things, trying to kind of find myself, what am I, to follow up on this earlier point is I wanted to be in elected office. I could only do that from Oklahoma City. My dad doesn't live there. My grandfather doesn't live there. My mother is deceased. It's really just the two of us. But how do I fit in all of this? And I ended up, I worked for what little effort was needed for President Bush's reelection in Oklahoma in 2004. And then I went and I worked for the lieutenant governor for a year. But none of that was really, the right thing long term. And then I got asked, I was 26, and I got asked to become the chief of staff to the mayor of Oklahoma City, who was a gentleman named Mick Cornett at the time. And that, it may appear from the outside that I was working my way down. I'd worked in the White House, the Capitol, the state Capitol, and now I was at City Hall. But that ended up being really, to me, the most fulfilling level of government. And now I was beginning to feel some definition about where it was that I wanted to serve. And so I did that for 5 years. It was a great time in Oklahoma City's history. Rachel went to OU Law, got a law degree. I ended up going to law school as well at Oklahoma City University at night. And
working full-time and going?
Working full-time as the mayor's chief of staff, and then I would go and work and go at law school from 6 to 9, Monday through Thursday for 3.5 years.
Well, a chief of staff, I mean, you have the same hours and more than the mayor. So.
Yeah, in our form of government, the mayor of Oklahoma City is not paid a living wage, so they usually have to have another job. So I'm really was the guy that was there at City Hall all the time.
Yeah.
I was 26 when I started in that position, and very ambitious and very eager and excited about the future of Oklahoma City. So this was kind of a time period where the city was really changing, coming into its own, blossoming from a really dark period in the 80s and 90s. We'd had basically an economic depression in the 80s caused by a dramatic drop in oil prices, an economic sector we were too reliant on. And then in 1995, of course, the Oklahoma City bombing. So it was just kind of one thing after another. And we'd started as a city to invest in ourselves. And all of that sort of blossomed around the time I was working in the mayor's office. We got the MBA team, we got just lots of big things were happening in Oklahoma City. And so we didn't have kids yet. That came in 2009. Actually, I took my last law school final. I drove home. I picked up Rachel, and we went to the hospital for her to give birth to
Holy
our
cow.
first child, George. So I got about, between law school and fatherhood, I had like 3 hours.
Well, and then you go into the elective office after that. One of the questions that are asked of women candidates and women elected officials, but I think it's a fair question for men also, is how do you balance work and family? And my answer, not being an elected, but I compare it to marriage. There's never really a balance. Sometimes it's 90-10, sometimes it's 40-60. Rarely is it 50-50. So I call it juggling. And how do you balance or juggle, whatever word you use, with that kind of schedule and your children? And tell us about it because we always hear from the woman's perspective, not from the man's.
Well, and I should mention, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that you're, and I'm sure there's many examples in your family, but we as Americans all know about your brother's example of always going home from Washington on the Amtrak. I mean, that's a great example of a father trying to find that right balance.
Yeah, he was a single dad for 5 years. Yeah.
So in my case, I think that first of all, you've got to. Yes, of course, there are days where it's all career. I mean, right now we're talking. I am far from home. I'm in a mayor's conference. I am not at home right now
with a very serious interview.
Yes, but you got to rebalance it. You got to make sure that there's other days where it's all family, and then in the end, on balance, that your family is first. I mean, if you're not thinking about how you're going to feel on your deathbed, then you're not doing this right. You got to remember that on your deathbed, you're going to be surrounded by your family, and all of these people that were a part of your career are probably not going to be there, and nobody ever said, I wish I'd spent more time at the office, I mean, so you've got to make sure that's the highest priority. Of course, we all find satisfaction in our careers, so it's okay to have some space for that. But yeah, it has to be the number one priority. And I think how that's manifested itself in my life is just always getting better at saying no. I mean, especially when you're mayor. I mean, you could do 50,000 things every single day. I mean, we spend so much time in my office going through scheduling requests, and I bet I say no 95% of the time, and I still feel like I'm probably doing too much. But just being present, especially my kids now are 12 and 10, and just being. I don't miss very many games. I mean, I'd say I'm at 98% of the games, and I enjoy that. I mean, I want to be there. It's not just for them, I want to experience those things, and so it's but it's you just got to make sure that you're focused on what's important. And actually, the longer you do this, and I've now been in elected office for 12 years, I realize what's really, at first when you first start out, you feel like you got to be everywhere, and then you sort of realize over time that you spent 3 hours at some dinner and they announced you, and nobody even remembered it. You'd have been better off spending those 3 hours at home.
As you know, the legendary Tip O'Neill said, "All politics is local," and in our family we say, "All politics is personal," and you sure do live it. So the people who have elected you mayor and those who didn't elect you are still very lucky that you are the mayor of Oklahoma City, and God bless your children and your family.
Well, thank you very much, and thank God bless your family and its half century of service now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll take it. Thank you. In the rapid fire questions, I have to ask you the number one question of what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
So this feels a little embarrassing, but I typically order vanilla.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I actually was in Shakespeare in the Park for 10 years as a kid, so maybe there's still room for a dramatic career.
Well, I think that's pretty exciting. Okay, I'm gonna look for you when your term finishes. Favorite TV show?
Like of all time?
Sure.
Probably Seinfeld.
What word would you use to describe yourself?
Ultimately, if you had to pick one word, I hope it's kind. I mean, that's ultimately something that needs to be at the foundation of everything you do.
Favorite music?
Oh, all over the place. I mean, I'm a child of the 90s, so you may be surprised how much, hip hop is played in my car. But ultimately, if I'm stuck on a desert island, if I can have the Beatles catalog, then I'd probably be fine.
Okay. Do you have a hidden talent? Well, I guess maybe Shakespeare in the Park is hidden,
Perhaps that's it.
But I don't want to lead the witness.
I can wiggle my ears.
Do you have a hidden talent?
Right. Yeah. My theatrical career is probably not well known in many circles. So yeah, the fact that I was in Shakespeare in the Park religiously in the plays of William Shakespeare for a 10-year period between third grade and high school graduation is something that I haven't followed up on.
It makes you remarkable. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Well, as mayor, it would definitely be flying, just so I could move fast. You got to be everywhere.
Okay, one last one.
Yeah.
What's your theme song?
My theme song?
Yeah. Well, if you're going on stage, do you play it, or do you? How do you feel about your music, your theme song?
Oh gosh, I don't know. It would be some pump up song, something that. Gosh, I really don't know. What do people say to this question? What are typical answers?
Well, some of them, This Girl's on Fire, which is not appropriate for you. Rocky may be appropriate for you because of the Philadelphia roots.
Yeah,
in reference to your wife.
That's my category of good pump up song.
Yeah, and you're going up the steps, and you
who doesn't love a little Eye of the Tiger?
Yeah, and you got that beautiful woman out of Philadelphia to Oklahoma City.
Yes,
God bless her. She's going right to heaven.
Indeed. And by the way, she is now the state agency director for juvenile justice in the state of Oklahoma. So she is definitely going to heaven for a lot of reasons.
Well, good. And I'm glad to know that she's there with you and you're there together. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for everything.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
And thank you to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And remember, all politics is personal.